Welcome to the All Things Nintendo podcast. I'm Brian Shea, and this is a weekly podcast to discuss all the biggest news and games from the world of Nintendo. This week, we have a very special guest joining me in the comfort of my own home, Atari CEO, Wade Rosen. Wade, how's it going?
Great. Thanks for having me back, Brian. You got video this time.
Yeah, so we did not do video last time. It was not a kind of a mainstay of the All Things Nintendo podcast at that point, but we're here now, and we are doing the video thing. It's a little tight, but we're making it work just so, we can continue having the video presence over on the YouTube. But thanks so much for joining me here in my luxurious basement.
It's gaming haven down here. It's really lovely. You guys can't see everything in here, but it's a nice there's a nice ambiance.
Try to keep it somewhat gaming related, and I think I may have gone a little overboard. At least the upstairs of the house isn't super gaming focused. It's very nice and quaint, we'll say.
You can tell you share the house with someone else
upstairs. Yes. So, Wade, last time I had you on, what was it, like 2 years ago?
Yeah, probably
a year and a half ago?
Probably about a year and a half, too.
Okay.
Yeah. Nicer weather, so we'll say a year and a half.
Yeah. So, we did the first Nintendo game, favorite Nintendo game. We learned a lot about you through your history with Nintendo. And now we don't have that, so I just want to kind of get like an update, really, from like how things are going with Atari. I think from my perspective anyway, it's been a very good year for Atari.
Yeah.
You had Tetris Forever most recently by Digital Eclipse.
Yep.
Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Rita's Rewind is on the horizon.
Yep.
What else? You had the Atari 50 expansions.
Yeah.
Yars Rising.
Yes, Yars Rising.
There we go.
Yeah, which is a gem. And one that I've enjoyed. But I think the thing from Night Dive, and then we have another announcement coming up in a couple weeks for something before the end of the year, and a few things scheduled for early next year. So it's been a pretty good. It's been a great year, and we're feeling even better about next year.
Awesome. So two of the biggest moves, and I think that coming into this role, you had to have felt a little kind of overwhelmed with the task that you had at hand.
Yeah, I probably should have felt more overwhelmed right when I came in, but I quickly reached that level of overwhelm. It was daunting because it was there's 50 years of baggage and decisions and things to sort through and history to get to know. And, the first 12 months were just taking stock, cleaning up, and trying to get set up for the future. So, I've been in this role for 3.5 years now, but these are like dog years. Like, it's 3.5 years, but I'm like, did I ever have a job before this? I don't know. I think I like finished high school and came straight to Atari, but so I think everybody who's at the company, we just care so much, and we dedicate so much of our time and our thoughts and our energy to this beautiful company that we I think we're all kind of shocked it's only been 3.5 years or for less for most people. Yeah.
And I don't know if I discussed with the lovely viewers and listeners the last time you were on the show how we met, but I remember it was DICE 2022. Yeah. I think it was.
Yeah,
and,
it was. Mm-hmm.
I had an email from one of your PR people.
Yeah. David Lowy, right?
Yeah. And he was like, "Hey, I want you to meet up with the CEO of Atari," and he's a Minnesota guy too, so I think you guys might hit it off. And this is not to offend you or anybody at the fine company of Atari, but I've met some of your predecessors.
Sure.
And I was like, I don't know, man. I don't know if I want to have a drink if it's anything like the ones that I've met before.
And now here we are.
We're friends, and we did hit it off. He was right. He was very right. We met up in Las Vegas of all places.
I know.
I forget what hotel it was.
I think it was
MGM Grand.
I think we were at the Delano.
That's right. Yes.
Because it was my first DICE, so it was pretty memorable. And actually, that was my first video game convention I ever went to, because my first year was still COVID, so there were no conventions. So it was and then everybody went to that DICE, and everybody got COVID. And
I did not. I avoided
I know, and I had just had it. Otherwise, I'm sure I would have gotten it. There's like everybody I knew got it.
Yeah, I didn't have it until for the first time May of that year, so I
Nice.
completely dodged it.
Good for you.
But yeah, so we hit it off, and we were just like, hey, we should hang out again sometime. And now we've kind of made this tradition where we go to one of the local arcade bars. Pretty
Up,
frequently, yeah, called Up Down here in Minneapolis, and it's a great time. We share a love for the video game industry and especially retro games, and we like to dice it up on like kind of our respective histories with various
Definitely.
gaming companies. We get kind of competitive.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I am surprised. I usually don't get too competitive with games, but like you bring it out. I mean, I think it's, yeah, I like, I'll feel myself kind of like, yeah, whatever. And then by the third match, I'm like, all right, like focus in. I'm not going to lose that bust a move one more time.
It was bust a move that you got pretty competitive. It was
That
like
one.
you went from friendly Wade to like laser focused Wade.
I know, that's the only one where I'm like, oh, come on. Like this is, a fighting game, I can give that, but bust a move? Like I should be, that's kind of my jam. So, and we keep threatening to go to other arcades in the area, but we just always go to Uptown.
Yeah,
So
it's a
if
good
you
spot.
come to Uptown in Minneapolis, there's a good chance that you will see us hanging out there, and you should come and say hi, and we'll give you some tokens.
We always have a bounty
we have
of tokens.
way too many. We go home with tokens.
And I went to
every
a
time.
charity event. I went to a charity gala. I think I told you this. And there was a silent auction, and I noticed one of the items for bid was a fanny pack full of up-down tokens. And I was like, yeah, why not? I'll throw my name in for that. And I ended up winning it completely
Yeah.
by accident. So now we have even more tokens.
You can add it to your Dragon's Horde of tokens. I mean, they're just like, I don't even know what to do. I never bring them. So it's always, they're just accumulating every time we go. And I bring them home and I'm like, oh, I'll add them to this pile here that's ever growing. So this is the stuff your viewers want to hear, right, Brian?
Yeah, absolutely.
This is the good stuff.
This is what they subscribe to in their podcast feeds for and subscribe on YouTube. So yeah, we've talked about two of the, I think, major moves that you have made when we were talking about like the games that kind of came out this year in the acquisitions of Digital Eclipse and Night Dive.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about like what that has done for Atari and its portfolio?
Yeah, and I'm trying to think if my guess is when I did the podcast last time we had not done those. Probably no. I mean they've really transformed the company. I mean, as frequently as 4 years ago, we were really not making games, or if we were doing mostly free to play games and not really using the Atari IP. To now going to just having internal development resources, several world-class teams that are the best in the world at what they do. And that's why we ended up making the acquisition, because we looked at who is the best in the world. That's kind of what we ask ourselves. We said we want to be great at retro games. Who are the other great companies? And the top two were Night Dive and Digital Eclipse. And then we've had several projects with them. Those have gone really well. And there's just this sort of fan love for those companies. I mean, if you look at Night Dive, they can remaster a game like PO'd, which people probably know more about PO today than they did when that game first released because of Night Dive. Right?
Yeah.
So, they're just amazing groups of humans and great companies, and couldn't be more happy to have them as a part of the organization. So those were really transformational for us, and we would do those again in a heartbeat. And
we talked about Yars Rising here, and that was a partnership with Way Forward.
Yeah.
And that's been another strategy that you've used. It's not just these companies that you've acquired,
Yep.
but also, partnering with these kind of best-in-class developers. So, like, how does the process go? And I don't know how involved you are with, like, this particular process, with, like, taking an established IP and matching it with a development studio.
Yeah, so, it really, with Digital Eclipse, I was familiar with them, and then after I was introduced, I talked to him about, hey, we have a big anniversary coming up. What would you do with this? And we'd asked a few other groups, and their pitch just blew everybody else away, and that ended up being Atari 50. And we're still making content for Atari 50, and hopefully we'll continue to work on that for years to come. But with each of those, we really go to them and find out what do they want to work on. I mean, Yars Rising was an organic pitch from Way Forward. I was very familiar with Way Forward because at Ziggurat, I'd worked with them on Blood Rain Betrayal and A Boy and His Blob, and I knew them from their Shantae series. So it was really to ask them, hey, what do you guys want to do? And that's what they came back with. And so, if it's a developer that we love and they have a really cool, what we think is innovative idea, we're willing to take a shot. And then for some, we just go find best in class devs. So if we're going to do another simulation game, we'll go look at companies in that space that have done similar titles and find the best ones to work with.
Yeah, and you also, what was the studio for Lunar Lander Beyond?
Oh yeah, that was Dreams Unincorporated.
Right. So they worked on, what was the... I feel like I reviewed the other game that they
Chris
did.
Tales.
Yes, I reviewed that game. Absolutely gorgeous RPG.
Beautiful, yeah. And Lunar Lander Beyond is beautiful. I mean, it shows. Like, you can tell, you can see a direct line from one to the other. And they approached us in that, and that was I was a big fan of Chris Tales and was like, yeah, let's give this a shot. With Night Dive and Digital Eclipse, it's a little bit different because they sometimes will work on Atari projects, but a lot of times they're working with IP that is outside of Atari. In fact, when we finalized that acquisition, I think people were really worried that we were going to force them to only do Atari IP. Mm-hmm. And, I understand the concern, but it's definitely not the case. Like, it would be like taking these two great dev studios and then just limiting what they have access to. I mean, that would short circuit any of the real value of the acquisition. So, I mean, there are some things that every once in a while we'll want to pivot back towards and hopefully work on, but for the most part, they're free to work on whatever they want.
And as you indicated, Digital Eclipse is still, despite doing all these projects, I don't know how they churn out so many things in a year, and they're all super high quality. I mean, we just got Tetris Forever last week, and now we have Rita's Rewind coming next month, and it's like, how is this even possible? Yeah. So they're not the hugest team. Like they're not like a strapped skeleton crew or anything, but they're not a gigantic AAA studio.
Totally. I mean, we have expanded both of them a little bit, which is nice. We've expanded or are continuing to look to expand. But it's nice to be able to say, and especially at a time when the industry's for the most part shrinking, to say hey, we want to grow, we want to keep doing new projects, we want to expand capacity. But I mean, you're bumping up against what is ultimately the biggest headwind on growth of Atari right now, which is development capacity. Because I mean, it's easy to put a lot of games into production. I mean, that's what the industry did over the last Look at COVID, right? Mm-hmm. We tripled the amount of games, we tripled the dev budget, the entire investment in the industry, and now we're paying for that because demand didn't keep pace. I mean, demand was stagnant or even went down while we overinvested. But it is nice to be able to invest in these areas where we feel that there's some pretty strong future growth. So right now we're more limited by team size and staff, but if you grow it too fast, you also break it. Mm-hmm. That's there's something really special to those teams. And if you try to be like, okay, well, we're just gonna go use XDevs, or we're gonna go do codev or anything like that. Like, there's a few things, art and things you can sometimes get some help with, but a lot of it's just slow, incremental growth, not stressing the system too much, and not breaking what's there because you want, to double or triple the team in a year.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's something that you have talked to me about when we were just kind of hanging out, is there's all these publishers that are acquiring so many studios. This week on my Patreon exclusive podcast, All Things Gamers, we were talking about these reports that Sony might be looking to acquire the parent company of From Software. And it's
Kodokawa.
Yeah, Kodokawa, which is also Spike Chunsoft and Acquire as well.
I think they only care about one company.
Hey, Spike Chunsoft had a big hit this year with Dragon Ball Sparking Zero.
Oh yeah, they did, didn't they? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I shouldn't. I mean, I like Spike, but if I was Sony,
oh yeah, From Software is the heavy hitter there.
Yeah, what's the crown jewel? Like pulling that into your orbit. I mean, it would make sense. It would make sense. I mean, if they pull it off, kudos to them. People will scream, right?
Them. You should outbid Sony.
Yeah, that's a battle that I like. Oh man, I mean, even if we could, which we absolutely can't, it would be. I can't imagine like the deck is ever going to be stacked in the in for an American company trying to outbid Sony on anything, right? But I mean, Kodakawa they're a great group. They've built something almost out of nothing there, and it feels that I actually have watched their stock price over the last few years. They'd be paying a lot, but you get kind of a one of a kind studio out of it.
Yeah, and in this news when it hit, it was a report from Reuters. Like their stock price apparently jumped up, even though neither company could comment on it. Obviously.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's.
You think we get a new Tenchu if that happened?
I mean, you'd think so. Like, but also like Acquire just did Mario and Luigi Brothership as well.
Right,
so it's like. It's weird how, like, Dragon Ball Sparking Zero published by Bandai Namco, Elden Ring published by Bandai Namco, and Mario Luigi Brothership published by Nintendo, obviously. Right. So I guess all of those studios would come in under the Sony umbrella if this acquisition does go through.
Well, I mean, they might let Bandai and people like that still publish, too. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's one of those, I don't know what, it's so interesting. I wonder what... I wonder if that'll have to go through the same kind of antitrust and mergers and acquisition approvals that
Activision did.
Well, certainly not. It won't be what Activision did because it's not the same scale. But I can't. Can you imagine Xbox even buying any game studio of significant size? Let alone of course, if it tried to buy like an EA or Take-Two, but even pick a smaller company. I just can't imagine they would let them get away with it anymore.
Phil did recently say, I think this was either earlier this week or late last week, where they asked like, "Hey, are there any other acquisitions that you're eyeing?" And he's like, "Yeah, but nothing of like any like scale compared to like Bethesda or Activision Blizzard, because like they would just not be allowed to at this point."
Exactly. I think you might be able to buy some tech, but so maybe Sony can get away with it. But you still need publishers. I guess maybe Sony would try and publish all of it, but it seems, man, I wonder if they'll end up still putting it out on Xbox or not.
Yeah, I feel like the future is multi-platform, or even at the very least platform agnostic.
Yeah.
Like you saw Xbox's recent this is an Xbox marketing campaign. Did you see that? Where it was like
no, I didn't.
It showed like the Xbox Series X. This is an Xbox. It showed a Series S. This is an Xbox. It showed like your PC. This is an Xbox. Your phone. This is an Xbox.
Totally.
Basically like saying like, hey, you can play our games pretty much anywhere you want. Like a ROG Ally. This is an Xbox.
Yeah,
they were showing like all these different pieces of hardware, and it's clever marketing campaign, but there's always going to be like that audience that's going to feel burned by that because they're like, hey, I just dropped like $500 a few years ago on this Series X. Like, what are you saying? Like, my phone is an Xbox.
Here's the one thing I'll say about the Series X though that's great is I'm a big fan of any company that really supports backwards compatibility.
100%.
And the fact that you can like play Panzergoon Orta or Witcher 2 on that thing, that's cool. Like that's still pretty cool, and so I feel like even if who knows what the future holds with Xbox, but I just love the fact that I probably use it more for like old games than I do like new ones, just because there's so many ways to play new games, but there's a lot of Xbox or Xbox 360 exclusives. Mm-hmm. It's great for
that. And they perform better on Xbox One or Xbox Series X than they did on Xbox 360. So like, one of the bigger recent releases was Sonic X Shadow Generations, and like one of the big selling points is like, okay, there's this whole campaign that is like all new, but also the original campaign of Sonic Generations is in there, and it's remastered at like 4K resolution, 60 frames per second. It's like I've had Sonic Generations from Xbox 360 on my Series X, and it's given me 60 frames per second since it was made backwards compatible. So
that's pretty cool.
It's a pretty cool feature, and Sonic games in particular, like Unleashed and like fast moving games like that have like beautiful visuals. they benefit so much from that 60 frames per second upgrade. Like I remember
Definitely.
when I got my PS5 and I was in the middle of playing Ghost of Tsushima, and I was just like blown away. I was like, this is like one of the most beautiful games I've ever played in my life. And then I fired it up on PS5 and like transferred my save over, and then it was suddenly running at 60 frames per second. And I was just like, this is a revelation. Like they've made the most beautiful game I've ever played somehow better looking.
I'm curious if maybe, that's interesting about that campaign. It feels almost like, I think for a long time it's been PlayStation and Xbox are kind of competing over that same space, that 8 feet in front of you space, and the Nintendo now has the up front and the 8 feet, and then you have Steam that's now right in
There's one right there.
Yeah, you got Steam Deck and then your PC, so like 18 inches, and I wonder if Xbox is trying to like get out of that direct competition a little bit, which would then leave, if that were the case, and make it more about streaming and really pushing into that, it would leave Sony as kind of the high performance part of the market, which the Pro sort of indicates that. And this is speculation, but it's if I'm Xbox, or if I'm anyone and I'm in direct competition with another large company, and everybody else has kind of found a niche, I just don't know if that's where I want to be. So it makes sense, because it kind of gives you something to say, like, this is how we're different. And Sony can do, they can have their difference as well. And maybe we assumed that everything's all places at once, and it could be with streaming, but I wonder if there is not like a little bit more product segmentation and specification in the future for these companies.
Now, one of the reasons I brought this up is, if there's talks of another acquisition, especially on a pretty sizable scale, From Software is one of the most beloved studios. Spike Chunsoft and Acquire have done great work as well.
Totally.
And I think there's a couple of other like smaller studios that are under the Kadokawa umbrella.
You're right. Yeah, I think some of those even own sub studios, right?
God.
So it's a wide web for sure.
So one of the things you've always stressed to me is like these companies will sometimes acquire these studios, and then then like kind of the reality sinks in of like, oh, we also have to not only support the projects they're working on, but also the salaries and all like kind of these like hidden costs that they may not take into account. I'm sure Sony is taking that into account, but like there are other companies like Embracer who have maybe not done the calculus as effectively as Sony might. But like we've also seen Sony hit with some layoffs this year, which is
Destiny 2.
Bungie got hit pretty hard, almost decimated, really. And they're
it was a big acquisition.
It was a huge acquisition. I think that in 2022 was when they picked them up, and then a year and a half later they're hitting them with layoffs, which is really disheartening and frustrating. But hopefully that doesn't happen, because Hidetaka Miyazaki this past summer during a series of interviews I was a part of, he referenced how he doesn't believe in like laying off people because like he's like, that's like squandered talent that we've like either cultivated or we've attracted intentionally, and gotta hope that that's just not going to be the case. When I can speak from experience that no matter how much a subsidiary wants to not lay people off, sometimes the parent company says yes you are,
right? And
that's a little bit frightening.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the industry's been through a lot of turmoil. I came in 2021. What a weird time to come into an industry, this industry specifically. But it was funny because, not funny is the wrong word, but it was really disheartening for us at first, because in 2021 we were in a full-on rebuild mode. So I felt like we were outside the party watching everybody have the time of their life. We're just kind of like, oh, what's going on in there, guys? Like, when's it going to be our turn? Fast forward a couple of years, and because we were deep in rebuilding, we didn't actually have the opportunity to ramp up like most companies. I don't know what we would have done. Maybe we would have done the same. Maybe we would have tried to scale. And I mean, I think that's the word that gets scary whenever you hear scale. Like, it is an important thing, but oftentimes what ends up happening is just this rapid ramp up to reach a certain like threshold that people deem as the necessary threshold. We didn't have that opportunity, so we didn't do it. And then when we were at a place where we could start, we stabilized, built the foundation, could start building the company again, it was actually while the industry was coming down. And so it's allowed us to, it's a tough market right now. I think everybody knows that for the video game industry, but it has allowed us to grow in a down market, which makes me feel pretty just pleased with the team and like satisfied about how we approached that. Again, I think we got lucky to some degree with our timing. That reference that you made to these acquisitions, like Embracer would be a good example. I think when people think of Embracer, they think they bought all this IP, and then they didn't have any money left because they bought all the IP. I mean, I'm sure they spent a lot of money on IP, but the IP is not what sucks up your capital. You know how much you're going to spend on IP. It's the purchase price. It's all the projects you greenlight. It's all the R&D. It's all, you spend X amount on a game, but you might spend 10x that developing a new game for that franchise.
Just the operational costs.
Yeah, and like then games, start to underperform, which is industry wide. So you thought you were going to have X amount of capital coming back to continue to fund the games in development. You don't, so then you have to start laying off some devs, and that kind of just becomes this vicious circle that can pull things down. And so I think, when we've done acquisitions, we've done quite a few acquisitions over the past few years, and people will point that out to me and ask like, well, is this just a mini Embracer? Are you guys going to be like Embracer? And I mean, I don't have a crystal ball. I really hope we're not, but I think there's a difference because a lot of them are IP acquisitions. Berserk, Frenzy, these were in television. We didn't acquire staff. We didn't acquire operations. We just were acquiring IP that is strategic and associated with Atari and kind of expanding what it means for the Atari ecosystem. There were a couple, the exceptions being Digital Eclipse and Night Dive, where there was like a notable amount of staff, notable for us, but that we are very careful about doing. We really looked at those and said, like, is this what we want to do? Do we want, because when you're doing that, it's not the purchase price. It's the next 5 or 10 games you're going to do with that. Like if you say yes to that, you're saying no to 5 other things. Mm-hmm. If you buy an IP, you know what that price is, you can factor it in, and then you can choose to like hopefully do things with it. But it's all the stuff you do after that. When you buy the dev studios, it's all the games that they're working on. It's all the future games they're going to work on. It's all the growth, and that is where it gets scary, especially as companies start to slim down. I think that people don't look at that enough with acquisitions, and just because it's the video game industry. Just because the company was profitable for a couple of years before has very little bearing on whether they're going to be profitable in 5 years, mm-hmm. because it can be quite hit driven unless you have, something that is a little bit more evergreen and you can lean on. But so I just don't know if people properly evaluate the risk.
And you come from a financial background, correct? And you're obviously a CEO of a video game company now. How do you see as like the way forward for kind of stabilizing this industry?
Yeah. Sorry, I swallowed that, went right down to my lungs because I was about to talk when you were saying something there, and I'm like, nope.
Very good for the podcast.
Just gonna throw that water right into my lungs. The way out for the industry is, I think, pretty straightforward. It's grow slower, have a more controlled growth. If you're growing, if your dev budgets are increasing at 50% a year, 100% a year, which it did during COVID, to recognize that we're probably in a bubble. It's probably not sustainable. Mm-hmm. I think 2 things. Number one, just really judicious investment in games and probably being very capital conscious. That way, that leads to more responsible growth, and then people can keep some money for a rainy day. Like, you don't have to push it to the brink every time. That's number one. Number two, I think is recognizing that that like what happened in the past isn't necessarily a guarantee of what's going to happen in the future. This isn't reoccurring software. This isn't like consumer goods. You only have a vague understanding of what the future is going to hold. It's probably, for an unreleased game, it's probably not good to use debt financing, for example. Like, this isn't an industry for debt financing. It's probably not a great industry for venture capital. Like, I mean, outside of development tools and maybe free-to-play games or things like that kind of fit a venture capital model. Whenever I see that, I'm like, wait, how would, unless venture capital wants something that's sticky, that's going to, give a 10-to-1 exit and return, 100-to-1 exit and return. You don't get that by like, stringing together singles and doubles in the video game industry. So I think, just having realistic expectations. We try to hit singles and doubles. If we get a home run, great, we'll take it, but we don't like bank on that or plan on that. And yeah, just growing at a reasonable pace so that the wheels don't fly off and everything doesn't have to be perfect for it to be okay. And then don't take on debt. I mean, that's especially for new games. Like, I think debt can get really dangerous. And that's not just right now. That's the history of video games. You see great game companies that end up being crushed by their debt burdens.
And also good advice for personal finance as well.
Yeah, that's very true, yeah.
And also don't produce, tens of thousands of copies of E.T. and then bury it in a desert. That's another good way to avoid a video game crash.
I think we even threw some other games in there too. People only talk about E.T., but I think there was even maybe some Pac-Man in there and a few others. Yeah.
Hey, I have a Pac-Man Atari 2600.
Yeah, I know. It's my youngest daughter's like favorite game, and it's not a good game. But
the 2600 version in particular. Or?
Yeah.
Oh my God,
it's pretty brutal. Now, some of the other 2600 versions that came later are like really good, but that 2600 version is kind of rough.
You got to introduce her to like
she loves
Championship Edition or something.
I know, she loves it. I don't get it. No, we play it on the 2600 Plus I have in my office. So I'll be like, let's play this 7800 version of like Miss Pac-Man. And she's like, no, Pac-Man. I'm like, okay. Like, it's like just terrible clipping and everything, and terrible
graphics are awful.
Oh, man. It's pretty rough.
What is your, completely shifting gears but staying on Atari, what is your favorite Atari IP? And I was asking you to kind of choose between your children at this point. But
my favorite Atari IP. I usually say Yars, but I'm like quite partial to Berserk.
Same.
But I'm gonna give a wild one, which isn't my like favorite, but it's kind of like the weird one that I do end up playing a lot is Dodgem. I don't know how you'd make a good. Have you ever played Dodgem?
I don't think so. It's
such a simple game, but it can only really be played with another player. But you basically have two cars, and one is just trying to smash into the other, and then you switch, and you're trying to smash into the other, and so you're trying to predict where it's going to go. There's a lot of timing to it.
Is it on Atari 50?
Yeah, it is. It is. We should play it. Yeah, we'll fire it up.
We will.
I want to do like a Dodgem Recharged at some point in time. But I don't know. Like, it's so simple. It's not like Centipede where there's like layers of depth to it that you can kind of unpack. Like, it's pretty much is what it is. I don't really know how you'd improve upon it, but it's good. So I'd throw that out there. If you got an Atari 50, you haven't played it. That's a really fun one. We also have the minor 2049er IPs, which those, the 5200 and the recently released 7800 ones are pretty fun too. Yeah. They're not Donkey Kong, but they've got that vibe.
All right.
Yeah.
So I actually asked some people in the community to submit questions.
All right.
We're going to get to that in a second. But before we do that, I had the honor to meet somebody that you have appeared on videos with, and I'm sure consulted with.
I think I know where this is going.
Over the summer, I got to attend the 40th anniversary party for Tetris.
Oh,
I got
okay.
to meet Alexi and Hank.
Yes. Awesome.
And then also Nolan Bushnell,
one of my favorites.
one of your predecessors.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I would have a drink with him.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I've had many drinks with Nolan. Yeah. He's great to drink with, by the way. Nolan, like I haven't known Nolan long, but I already have quite a few Nolan stories. But I think my best Nolan story is just the fact that when I met Nolan, I was kind of like, okay, you're gonna be Nolan. Like, he's as far as the video game industry goes, like a celebrity, and I was like, yeah, but he probably won't be that great. Like, just have realistic expectations, because we did a long interview with him for the 50th anniversary, and he was awesome. Like, he just genuinely a fun person to be around. It wasn't excuse me. It wasn't at all, there wasn't any artifice to it. He has I don't know if I'm trying to think of I have a clear expression, but I don't know if I should say it on the podcast, but he's past the point of caring too much what other people are going to think. So he's just very authentic, very himself, really fun to be around. I've had a lot of great time, just nights out with Nolan and great times talking to Nolan. Genuinely, one of my favorite people.
Yeah, he's enthusiastic still about doing stuff. I don't know. I think he's in his 80s now.
He is.
And I was talking to him for probably about 10 minutes, not like a super in-depth conversation, but I was like, hey, you've had an amazing career, an incredible legacy. Co-founder of Atari, founder of Chuck E. Cheese.
Totally.
What more is there to accomplish? And he was like, oh, I'm not done yet.
Yeah, I know. You open up a can of worms. I bet. Yeah. All right, Brian, let me pitch you on this.
He really did, too. He went on to full on, hey, here's what's next for me. And it's man, you deserve some rest. Is basically the way I put it.
That's what I love about Nolan is he's just not made for rest. And he is really a creative genius. I know sometimes I'll talk to people and they try to, and I mean, there's a lot of people involved in the success of early Atari, and it wasn't all just Nolan, but Nolan is inherently a very creative and dynamic person. I mean, there is a reason why that happened with Nolan, and I don't think it was just coincidence. I don't think it was right place, right time. I think that's a confluence of a lot of his skills with the time, and yeah, if anybody has a chance to grab a drink with Nolan, highly recommend it.
It's not an opportunity that comes around too often.
Yeah. Or at least get a signature at a convention. Yeah.
I didn't get a signature. I did get a selfie, though.
Oh, nice. Even
so
better.
I'll take that.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's jump into some of these questions here. Like I said, I put out a call with not a whole lot of advance warning. We did kind of set this up on the fly today.
That's true.
But
we've been talking about it for a while, and then the holidays coming. It was let's just knock it out. Let's get it done.
Sure. So I put out the call over on the All Things Nintendo Patreon Discord, which is one of the perks for subscribing to any tier of the All Things Nintendo Patreon. Also gives you early and ad-free episodes, Q&A priority. And then at the $10 level, you get the All Things Gamers podcast, which is an entire second weekly podcast. So this is from that Discord community.
And if you pay for the highest one, you also get to fire gotchas over at guests like me. So not just Q&A, but Ryan will queue up a gotcha and try and send a zinger across.
All right, so Cody over on the Discord says, that time of year, curious as to what his game of the year is. No pressure, though. Personally, it's hard to top Metaphor Refantasio for Cody.
Oh, that's a good choice. I had a chance to play that, although I love the dev and the team there. Mine is a very unsurprising one, and it's Astrobot.
It's so good.
It's just good. It's just I just found myself. It's where I'm also at in my life right now. I can't have a to-do list with my games. I've got enough of a to-do list in my life, and I could just sit down and I could play it for an hour at a time at night, and it always made my day a little bit better. And I think that's something to be said. I didn't have a to-do list of items. I wasn't thinking about all this stuff. It was just, it wasn't sometimes I really want like a deeply challenging experience, but it's more just the experience with that game. You're like, it's kind of how much you're smiling and the joy that it's bringing you, and it was great. I was just so impressed, and you guys actually recommended it to me. I mean, I was familiar with the Playroom and some of the other stuff before that, but I hadn't thought much of it. And you're like, no, Astrobot is going to be amazing, and I was like, yeah, okay. And then I was like, well, I'll try it, and you were right. It's fantastic.
Yeah, was that when we were all at dinner together?
That was game night.
Okay, so that was, we were over at Dan Reichert's house playing old PS2 games up on his giant, the biggest TV I've ever seen in my life.
If you want to put like my hardest time laughing,
oh my god,
of the year,
what game was that?
It was the game where there's like a
giant like sexy lady destroying your city, like who's like a kaiju.
Yeah, as a kaiju,
and you're flying around in a helicopter.
You have to like take sonar of like body parts or something.
It's the most bizarre thing I've ever seen in my life.
It was surreal, to say the least. And I think it got ported. I don't think it was just Japan only. I think it got ported to like PAL territories or something. I thought it was in
wasn't
English.
US though, right?
No, I think it was PAL.
I don't think it ever came to the US.
No,
so.
it was,
what a strange,
it had more
bizarre...
European sensibilities.
And then we played some Choo Choo Rocket.
Oh, I introduced the crew to Choo Choo Rocket. Yeah, which was fun until everybody started got better than me. But it was like
yeah, you were dominant in those first few matches.
I know. That's the best part when you introduce people to a new game and you're like, let me just kick your ass here for a bit at this. Choo Choo Rocket, one of my all-time favorite Dreamcast games. But what a fun party game, Choo Choo Rocket. That needs to be remade. Like, such a simple game. Like, Sega could make that thing for like $5. Just give this small niche, the 20 people who want Choo Choo Rocket in the world, give us a remake of Choo Choo. Also, if you want to see something great, look up the Choo Choo Rocket commercial on YouTube. It's 12 seconds long, I think, or 15. Unbelievable! It's so good. It's like a very short, twisted nightmare. So, lovely.
Which also is, the pitch for Sega Saturn. Very short, twisted nightmare.
Yeah, come on.
I know that's your favorite. I had to throw a little bit of a jab.
It's my second favorite, but it is, I think, the most underrated console of all time because there are so many great exclusives for that thing. Like that. The time has been kind to the Sega Saturn. Like, it was very cruel at first, but people look back and they're like, wait, there's a lot of good games for this thing.
It's a shame they never got that Sonic game that they were planning on putting out, Sonic Extreme.
Yeah. But I mean, Panzer Dragoon Saga, Guardian Heroes, Dragon Force,
Daytona USA.
Shining Force 3, Burning Rangers, still super beautiful and cool. I'll stop.
You were talking about my
this is a Nintendo podcast.
You were talking about my gaming haven, and I've been to your place. I guess your old house because you've moved in the time since. But you have a pretty amazing collection yourself.
Thank you. I need my own space though, which is I've kind of been shuffled into an office, and I don't have the whole basement to myself because of the kiddos. But yeah, it is. It's a pleasure, and it's been nice though. I'll give a little shout out right here to Polymega. It's been nice having that because I have consolidated a lot of my retro consoles down to that one, and I was able to play Police Knots on it, which I had, but had never been able because of the Japanese making it pretty much impenetrable, sideload in translations. So I really am a big fan of the Polymega. I play my Saturn games on there, TurboGrafx, CD games, PlayStation, obviously, N64. So it's a little shout out to my buddies over at Polymega.
So what is your first favorite console then? If Saturn, I always thought Saturn was your favorite.
PSP.
Oh, okay.
What a weird one, right? But I have a soft spot for handhelds, and I think the PlayStation. I think the PSP was just so. It was just so incredible. It was such a massive leap forward. It was the Game Boy Advance, and then you have the DS, which is also a great little console. But the Game Boy Advance to the PSP, it jumped 2 generations right there. I mean, it was crazy. The fidelity increase and what it could do, and I mean, technically, the Game Boy Advance, it was probably only one, but they were porting a lot of those PS2 games to it, and it always felt like the Game Boy Advance was more like 16-bit, so it kind of was on the advanced side of either, but it was a great jump, and the Valkyr profile on that version was really good. It's now been ported, but the Tactics Ogre version, I think I've already given a shout out on this podcast.
Yeah, that was your eShop gem last time.
Like, put in a lot of time on the PSP with that, but there were so many good RPGs and fun strategy games, and played that, and I took it all over the world with me. Dracula X Chronicles, that was where I first played Symphony of the Night.
Yeah, and I learned recently that is on PS4 now. So
yes,
because I was like, why is Symphony of the Night not on any modern consoles aside from Xbox? Because it was on Xbox 360 through like XBLA, and then I was like, oh wait, it is on PlayStation 4, but why isn't it on Switch? Like Symphony of the Night needs to be on Switch.
It's kind of crazy, isn't it? It's really crazy, and why is that still probably the best arguably probably still the best Metroidvania. Like, why does it feel so good? Why?
Movement feels great. Combat feels amazing.
Man, it's just wild.
Exploration.
And it's an older game. Like, usually, there's growth in that. And then Metroidvanias have come a long way. Mm-hmm. But there is something very special about that one where it holds up well. If you haven't played it, give it a go.
Unfortunately, not on Switch.
Right. Sorry.
Okay, I'd like to... this is from Mad Genie, a.k.a. Confused Koala. I think it'd be fun to hear his thoughts on game making as the head of arguably the first major games company in the United States.
On game making?
Yeah, just I guess we could almost parlay this into a talk about the legacy of the brand, or just as being the head of this beloved company.
Yeah. There's a couple parts there. There's my role in that, which is, I really try to let the creatives be the creatives. So I'm not swooping in and being like, wow, move this over here and do this and do, standing over people's shoulders and trying to influence too much. I do play all of our games. I do, but I think that's important for everybody on the team to do that. My knowledge of it's relatively limited, being new to the industry, but there's a couple things I've noticed. Like, the more people you can have playing the games, this sounds obvious, but too many games I think get made in a vacuum until it's like, okay, now it's perfect and I'm going to put it out in the world because I'm afraid of the feedback I'm going to get. I think the more people are playing it, the earlier and frequent, and the more people as frequently as possible and as early as possible that can play the games, the better it'll turn out to be. And you don't want a lot of disparate feedback. You still need to be able to cut through the noise and say thank you for that, not interested, or thank you, but or not relevant. But it is I think it's the same with companies. People get sort of obsessed with something, it becomes precious to them, and it gets so far down the road that you can't really kill your darlings. And it's good to collect that feedback and really to anchor down to is this fun? Talking about Astrobot, it's really fun. It's just a joyful experience, and I think when somebody's doing it, as people get away from that, they get further and further from what really brings them into it. The second, I guess, the most important thing is what can you be best in the world at? We ask our teams that all the time. If you can't be best in the world at something, then maybe don't make the game. That's, I think you want to talk about part of the issue with the last few years is there's a lot of games out there, and there's only so many that can cut through the noise, and I think the ones that cut through the noise are doing something. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't mean can you be the best FPS? That's crazy. No, but could you be actually I don't want to bring it up because it's going to be my Switch game of the day, but could you be the best, Balatro being an example, deck builder that is also based on actual playing cards. Nobody's done that. That's they are the best. If somebody now made, and people are making, a lot of Balatro variants, each one will have probably descending market penetration until somebody does something really interesting and cool. So it's a high bar, but what can you be best in the world at? And at the very least, if you do that, I think there's a niche that you can match up with. One of the challenges with retro games is just knowing how much demand there is. You know, there's usually something that we can do with all retro games, but some of it's as simple as like putting it in a collection like Atari 50. Others are remasters, others are whole, entire remakes or sequels, but not all games are going to be able to justify a full-blown sequel. And I think that's something that the industry's coming to terms with as well.
What is your approach to that, like, kind of sequelization of the industry? Because I feel like both in movies and video games, a lot of games and movies used to be like, oh, this was successful and we have ideas for like subsequent entries. Now it's like so many companies go in with like, this is going to be a major franchise for us, and like going forward we're going to do this, and then they don't even get off the starting line because the first entry flops. Well,
I think, okay, so going in with the assumption that it's going to be a bunch of sequels, that is you were talking about cursing yourself. That seems like, man,
the most egregious example is probably Too Human on Xbox, where they're like, this is our God of War.
Right. I forgot. I mean, it's how long, when was the last time anybody thought about Too Human?
I have a sealed copy of it.
I think, wasn't that like, didn't that have to get returned or something like that? Yeah, ooh, it might be worth something.
Got it for $2.
Oh, nice. I bet that's appreciated to $8 probably by now. I think, so my thoughts on that are that, like, I hear a lot about, as far as like starting off to do sequels, that seems like a really not great way to approach a first game. Just make the first game great and the sequel will come. But I hear a lot about how it's all sequels and things like that today. And there certainly seems like there's a lot. But if you think about some of the best-selling games over the last few years, I just don't know if that's always entirely true, right? Like, I mean, Astrobot I would not call that a sequel. I wouldn't call Elden Ring a sequel. It's building on its predecessors, but it's not necessarily like a dedicated sequel. Alan Wake 2, but it's so revolutionarily different. It's wildly different from Alan Wake. They're like, yeah, it's a sequel, but like they're really kind of taking it to the next level. So I think there's a difference between like, hey, let's milk this, which I almost feel like was worse 20. Think about 15 years ago. There was a new Call of Duty every year.
Still is.
Is it every year?
Yeah.
I thought they would put it to every 2.
No, it's pretty much every year now. I think Assassin's Creed has tapped the brakes quite a bit.
Yeah, maybe you're right. I thought they had slowed it down a bit. Also, can we just, this is a real quick aside, but for anyone in the Twin Cities area, kudos Activision on coming up with one of the best video game marketing advertisement campaigns. Wow.
I pulled over the first. So for people who are unaware, there is a real estate agent who has very like well-known billboards here in the Twin Cities.
Hundreds.
Yeah,
hundreds,
and they've been around for decades, or at least a decade. They've been like everywhere.
Right? He seems young though. He's really had those up there for a decade.
Since I've moved here, his billboards have been there.
Yeah,
and it's just him with his arms outstretched.
Like this.
And that's the billboard. And Call of Duty and Activision marketing saw this. I'm sure they've done other ones around the country that have like parodied other like famous like local billboards. And they just have like the Black Ops 6 guy with his arms out like that in the same color scheme and everything. Yeah. And instead of saying like guaranteed offer on your home, it says guaranteed Black Ops in your home. And then at the bottom, callofduty.com.
I was watching a football game and that thing just popped up on the screen for like 30 seconds as a preview. It just slowly panned in to him for 30 seconds.
I didn't even know there was a TV component of it. I've just seen it driving down the highway.
No, so anyway, that's not my series or my franchise, but like, good job, Activision. Like, you crushed that ad campaign.
I was legitimately thinking, I hope that Activision marketing wins an award for that.
I hope they do
concept.
Too. It was great. What were we talking about? Oh, sequels. But there are a lot of just like absolutely, like, is Super Mario Brothers Wonder a sequel? Like,
oh yeah. I would say anything, any franchise game. Like, but I guess the point that you're talking about though, where it's like Alan Wake 2, yes, there were people who played Alan Wake back
Yeah.
in 2010 when it came to Xbox 360, and they've been wanting an Alan Wake game for, 13 years.
Yeah.
And, maybe that is a small percentage of the people who went and bought Alan Wake 2, but I would say the vast majority of people who played it did not play Alan Wake 1, so even though it is a sequel, it's drastically different, it's a completely different type of game, and I don't think that the majority of its sales were on the back of the IP strength.
Or let's take the big one from last year, Baldur's Gate 3, right? Are people being like, oh, another sequel? We had it. I mean, that game. When was the last one? It was 20 years ago, right?
Yeah.
Or more. Like I don't think anyone's looking at Baldur's Gate 3 as a quote unquote sequel. That's not what it is. It's a radically. I mean, that thing is a sea change in terms of like what video games are possible, and I just think we need to, yes, sequels are prevalent, but that's always been the case even since I was a kid. If anything, I feel like the way to get noticed now is to actually avoid just kind of the sequel paralysis, and you see that with Far Cry, and you see that with Assassin's Creed, and I think that Call of Duty slowed down a little because there certainly was some fatigue there. I mean, there's still a lot of them.
By the way, Black Ops 6 is the best Call of Duty in 5 years.
Right.
It's fantastic.
Yeah. So, I mean, it feels like they kind of slowed down to speed up a little bit on that. But but most of the great games, even if they are part of a line, they're really doing something innovative. I just don't know that the sequels are necessarily always the issue. And if we're honest, Baldur's Gate 3 is not a sequel. It's like a work of art that stands on its own.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Let's see. Got a few more here.
I am also, running Atari, so I might be a little biased on that one, Brian. I might be a little biased.
This is from Three Sword Sama. What IP are they going to remake or follow up on next? They just did Yars Rising, so I assume they have more plans. It seems that they are making a comeback, and I love to see it.
Well, I can't. My PR team would be very upset if I accidentally dropped our future plans on the podcast, which I've done before. I've done that kind of. But what I would say there is, what you're seeing with Tetris Forever, that certainly won't be the last project like that. What Night Dive's been working on and working with games outside of Atari won't be the last ones that they do, but I think, man, that is a delicate dance.
Well, you just want to talk about maybe the ways that you look towards kind of the philosophy of following up on these franchises.
We really look at how we have some amazing Atari games, but there's only so far that you can take those. Those are probably a little bit less interesting, or they might be done as a recharge title. But as we look at larger releases, I think there are some games that stand out in the Atari portfolio and the larger Atari portfolio that certainly deserve new entries. And we'll have a lot to share in the coming year from Digital Eclipse, Night Dive, and Atari, and even Infogrames. They're back in the action now too after a couple decade hiatus, and the Infogrames is making a lot of waves too, so some fun stuff there too.
Awesome. Okay, so I know you have the Atari VCS on the market right now, but Double Barrel 25 asks, what are the chances Atari ever makes another console?
Well, we do. I mean, we've got the 2600 Plus and the 7800 Plus, which is going to be, coming out probably by the time you see this. It's probably available we've announced it, and it might even be available to buy and be shipped to you by the time you see this. But I would say we are making consoles. We just try to make consoles that we can be the best in the world at again. So the question there is, what as Atari today can we be best at? Making classic Atari consoles. If you look at where we can expand or go from here, I think there's a couple. We've certainly proven that model out, and I would love to see that continue to expand and encapsulate some other consoles. But maybe it's also going beyond that. But we'll probably be sticking to retro for our hardware for a little while. I don't think there's any reason. PlayStation, Xbox, and Nintendo do a pretty good job, so probably no reason to compete with them.
Yeah, how do you view that? I know we're coming up on time here, but how do you view that kind of like? Because everybody's like, oh, could Sega ever get back into the console market? And it's like, I feel like PlayStation, Microsoft, and Nintendo have a pretty solid lock on like the modern console market.
I'll pose that same question. What could Sega do that they would be best in the world at that would be fundamentally different than those other three? And there might be something that they could do in the hardware space, but it probably wouldn't actively compete against those three. Because also, if you're Sega, you make all your money on those platforms. Like, why would you make yourself a competitor to those platforms? That's Nintendo. I mean, I love that Nintendo is still making hardware, and I hope they do forever. But if they all of a sudden you could buy Zelda games on PlayStation and Xbox, I don't know whether they'd make more or less money. I don't want that personally. I love that there's three market players out there, but it just feels like it really limited Sega if they did that. And I still think there's ways that they could participate in the hardware business that aren't going head to head against those three. Mm-hmm. Four now, if with the Steam Deck. Sure.
Okay, this is another one from Three Swords Sama. First, it says, does he know the release date of Switch 2? And then laughing face emoji. And then follows up with, how does streaming and social media change your marketing strategy, and how are they marketing themselves to young gamers?
All right, give me that one more time.
How does streaming and social media change their marketing strategy, and how are they marketing themselves to young gamers? I'm assuming just because, Atari's kind of like, your dad or your grandfather's, video game company. How do you appeal to that younger generation?
Totally. Well, in regards to the Switch 2, I do not. As far as social media and streamers go, first you have to have titles that appeal to those demographics. We're very active with social media. We do a lot there for all parts of our business, and it just varies based on the customer segment that we want to target. Where applicable, we definitely do work with streamers. We, that box actually that you showed from Yars, I don't know if you can hold that up, that went out to a lot of streamers with the game release, and it actually had a playable, this is a functioning, you can put that in a 2600 Plus and play that.
There we go.
An actual 2600 card. So, we do quite a bit, but it really takes the right game too. So Infogrames publishes a game called Bread and Fred. Are you familiar with that one?
I'm not.
It taps into the zeitgeist of penguins, co-op, and super cute pixely graphics. And it was initially a small release, but kind of blew up because of streamers. And it is deceivingly difficult, especially in co-op. But it's about these two ice climbing penguins, and you just work your way up a mountain. For those, you just have to pick your audience, right? And which ones are really going to resonate for that. We always try to do some work with streamers, but say for the Atari 50 DLC, we worked with Metal Jesus Rocks, and that's just going to be a little bit more targeted to that demographic. So, someday I would love to see the Atari IP move down into Gen Z and Gen Alpha, but also I think it's okay to make games that, are targeted towards your prime demographic, and that's what we try to do. When it's appropriate, we'll market towards younger gamers, but sometimes that's people need to remember the millennials and the Gen X's and maybe even some boomers in there too. Who knows?
Let's see. Paul at Drunk on Mako asks, does Atari have any VR aspirations or interests in developing for it?
So we did a VR game last year called Pixel Rip, and It's a beautiful game. It's really a great title. I think the challenge for us is still figuring out how to crack VR, because I think what people found with VR is people buy it, they enjoy it, but they don't. It's not like your PlayStation or your Switch or your Xbox where you're buying games every month or every couple months. It's kind of like people have their 10 games or 5 games or 3 games, and that's what they play.
For me, it was like one game. I had like Beat Saber.
Beat Saber, right? Super hot. The mini golf game. Like,
oh, yeah.
There's like, this handful of games. And so I just don't know how you stand out in the crowd. I do think, though, like Atari games could be adapted really well to VR. Centipede, I mean, just simple, easy, pick up and play. We're not opposed to it, and if the right pitch found us, we would probably consider that at some point in time, but it would need to be just like very pure, very clean, feel great, super enjoyable, not be overly complex. And I think that's kind of what we've learned in VR is Beat Saber is not a complex game. Super Hot is not a complex game. And so it's just, does the core game itself feel fun? Well, if like Asteroids or Centipede or Breakout could be made to feel really fun. Yeah, possibly.
And if you haven't played Super Hot, absolutely go play Super Hot in VR or not.
Yeah, true.
Fantastic couple of games actually.
Yeah.
Because there's the regular one, and then there's what was the second one? Push something delete. I don't know what the follow up was.
Super Hot, but I played it on regular, played it in VR, and I liked them both. And the VR is like pretty cool. They did a nice job.
Yeah, I heard it was pretty great.
Yeah.
So Jared Demadred says, can we get a sequel to E.T.? Can't be worse than the first one. Take it from someone who unfortunately played it. Three Sword Sama follows up with open world E.T. And then Mad Genie, aka Confused Koala, says probably a remake. I don't know if Spielberg would want to relicense it though. And then followed up again by Jared Demadred saying, you'd be surprised what can happen if someone is willing to throw enough money at it.
So E.T., a lot of interest around E.T. That's interesting. I mean, it kind of is open world, right? You're sort of you can fall in a lot
not so open when you fall into one of those pits.
you can pretty much pick whatever pit you want to fall into. But
player choice.
Yeah, player choice. Like without going too deep into E.T., we would love to work on E.T. It's been, I think, on a lot of people's lists for a long time, and to like make it what it should have been. I mean, Howard Scott Warshaw really got put in a tough spot with that. Like, It is not a great game, but it's not his fault. He was a fantastic developer. He is still an amazing human. But we'd love to have a chance to clean it up, fix it up in what it should be, and then, probably put it side by side with a more like modern but retro style game. It could be fun. Probably a pretty big pit we got to dig ourselves out of there.
Any chance for it to come to any chance for it to come to Atari 50? Because I feel like that was one that a lot of people were like, oh man, that's like a glaring omission.
I mean, we'd love to continue to build Atari 50. That one is going to be a long walk for a short beer, I think, on that one.
Sure. But yeah, I mean, if you haven't heard the story of E.T.'s development, there is a fantastic documentary series on like the history of video games on Netflix. I forget what it's called. Is it not Coin Up?
Game Over?
It might be Game Over. I'm going to look it up real quick. But Howard Scott Warshaw is heavily featured, and his story of developing...
Oh, wait, was it the one on Netflix? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
High Score.
High Score.
There, I knew it was some arcade. I was like, coin
Game
up,
Over.
insert coin.
Sorry, Game Over is that documentary from like 10 years ago where they really... That's where they go to the landfill and they dig it up, but they kind of look at it as... they sort of pin the video game crash on E.T., which it was a little bit more than E.T. If you talk to Nolan, he's like, oh yeah, that thing was going to crash regardless. Because we didn't... I mean, in Atari's or just the industry's defense... That was the first console cycle. So nobody knew how long a console lasted, and the answer is 7 years about. Well, it was 7 years old, and they didn't cycle it out, and people were just tired. They were tired of the games. And you can see that because what if they had what if they had been the ones to bring Nintendo, and Nintendo actually offered to license the Famicom to Atari to bring the Atari to the US. I mean, it could have been done. It could have come out, like the 7800 is about the same specs and was scheduled to release in, I think, late 83, 84 initially. Like, the tech was there. They just didn't really know that you eventually had to cycle it out. And maybe they, like, sat on that a little long. I mean, is that happening with the Switch right now? I mean, we're 8 years in. It does feel like, maybe they pushed the year too long, right? Like, you can kind of feel it, they're what used to be 3 platform games now, just less and less of those, and you're seeing it with the Switch sales. So it does feel like 7 years that's kind of the magic number.
It does.
Yeah.
And, that kind of idea and that concept that the public had of, like, not realizing that there are console life cycles really persisted until, like, the 90s when, like, I love watching, like, old news clips about, like, gaming.
Yeah.
From, like, the 80s and 90s and, like, people just having no idea. Like, oh, these people are waiting in line for the new fad, Nintendo. And it's, like, people buying the Christmas presents and, like, lining up at 5 a.m. outside toy stores.
Yeah.
And then, like, the interviews they had with, like, outraged parents in 1991 when they were like, they want us to buy another console, another system. What's wrong with the ones they have?
We just bought them a Nintendo 5 years ago.
Yeah, it's like, this is a scam. And it's just like, yeah, well, now look at, like, we're all buying new phones every couple of years, new computers every few years.
Yeah,
so we're
that's
all
like
conditioned
planned
to
obsolescence, right? This makes it seems quaint in comparison to the way it works today. Yeah.
So, Wade, we're going to wrap up here in a second, but you referenced you have a eShop gem that you wanted to shout out.
Yeah. So I was a big fan of Void Bastards back in the day, and I haven't had a chance to play it on the Switch yet, but WoW Bastards is a great game, and I'm sure it's equally great on Switch, because I played Void Bastards a ton on my Switch, and so... Are you familiar with that one?
Yeah, Void Bastards I played a little bit of. I played a little bit more Wild Bastards.
Oh, so you've been playing it? Yeah. How is it on the Switch?
It plays well.
Yeah.
It's not a super, like, graphically intensive game, so unless it was just completely, like, poorly optimized, I can't imagine it would be like a massive resource hog for like something like the Switch.
So and then of course Tetris Forever. Thank you, Brian. Go ahead, plug that. That is, like, perfect for the Switch. In fact, that's, like, primarily what I play that on, and it's great for all the Tetris games. We'll look to continue to, much like Digital Eclipse does with all their games, continue to support that post-launch, and probably be some more content eventually.
And of course, we have Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Reader's Rewind on the horizon.
1 month, yeah.
Yeah, we are
December 9th.
Less than a month.
Oh man, we're a few weeks away. Wow. Okay.
This is one I'm very excited for.
That's why it's stressful over here at the Atari offices these days.
But hey, I mean, it's a game that's looking better and better with every single time I see it. Again, it's from Digital Eclipse, which listeners to this show know that I have the utmost faith in that studio. You do as well from all of our conversations.
One of the best.
I'm a massive fan of Shredder's Revenge. So, like, taking an IP that I loved as a kid, putting it in, like, a retro style but modernized gameplay, like, system, like, I'm a sucker for that. Like, Sonic Mania, Shredder's Revenge, like, all of those are just, like, frothing at the mouth excitement. So I'm, like, so in on you can't see it on the video, but if you look over your shoulder, there's a couple of Power Ranger figures from the 90s on my bookshelf over there, so I'm excited.
So in classic Digital Eclipse fashion, they never make it easy on themselves. They're never like, okay, we're going to do a beat 'em up. They're like, well, what if we did, a classic beat 'em up mixed with Outrun, mixed with, Punch Out, mixed with, so, it's not just a beat 'em up, you're actually, in the Space Harrier themed levels, you're in Outrun, like, style levels, and then, like, finish in the Megazord. I was a little old for Power Rangers, but I am going to play with my daughter. The Megazord, and, like, you finish in a Punch-Out style boss battle. So as you're progressing through the level and through these episodes, it's really just like in the TV show. They're essentially like kind of moving from action scene to action scene. So it's like they had to build 3 games in one for this one. So kudos to Digital Eclipse. You know, got to make it hard for yourself. But they always got to one up themselves, and that was their challenge there.
So I'm assuming you're not going to be able to say much here, but Digital Eclipse has done a fantastic job supporting Atari 50.
Yeah.
Do you know if there are any plans for them to support Ria's Rewind or Tetris Forever with like future updates?
You know, more to follow. You know, I don't want to take away from what we'll announce in the future, but it's rare that we put out a game and don't continue to, you know, support it over time and have additional content there. So I think for both of those, it's quite likely that those will continue to be supported. That's just sort of the policy of both Digital Eclipse, Night Dive, and even, you know, Atari, whenever we can, to continue to support these games after their launch. And something like Atari 50, like that's sort of a living collection, you know, in some ways. So yeah.
And maybe one day we'll get E.T.
Ooh, I don't. I guess you never know. You never know. We'll just say.
Hey, you already admitted you don't have a crystal ball.
I don't have a crystal ball, so who knows? Maybe one day we'll get ET.
But you're saying Berserk was a much more likely outcome.
Yeah. So I mean, that was a great example. We bought Berserk and Frenzy, and we were able to dive into that, plus a lot of forgotten ones. And then we were able to do M Network and some of those titles, and really look at the first console war with one of our other DLCs. And I would love to just continue to see Atari 50 grow and cover even more and more Atari history as the years go on.
Awesome. Well, Wade, thank you so much for joining me for this episode.
Thanks, dude. Always a pleasure, man.
And thank you so much for everyone for listening. Do me a favor, if you haven't already, throw All Things Nintendo a 5-star review and hit that subscribe button. If you want to get in touch with me, you can do so through the Patreon page, the community Discord, which is a part of being a part of the Patreon page, or hit me up at brian@allthingsnintendo.com. You can find me on social media at Brian P. Shea. That is also my YouTube channel, so subscribe there if you haven't already. Wade, where can people find you online? You're more elusive than I am.
You can find Atari on everything. Just look up Atari. Don't look me up. I'm not interested. But Twitter, probably Instagram. Oh, Discord. We do a lot on Discord. As you can see, I run our PR campaigns. But I think Twitter is probably the major one. Twitter and Discord, and apparently Blue Sky's a thing. Is that a thing?
I'm ditching Twitter completely. I'm going to Blue Sky.
Yeah,
so,
we do a lot on there. So does Digital Eclipse. So does Night Dive. Follow all three. They're all great. So
all right. Well, that does it for this episode of All Things Nintendo. Thank you so much for listening. Take care. We'll see you next time. Before we wrap up this episode of All Things Nintendo, I just want to give a special shout out to the $10 patrons to the All Things Nintendo podcast. Aaron Smith, Abdulla, Adam Scott, Alana R, Alec Aquinino, Alex Stadnik, Andy Junkins, Ben Richlin, ChainWhippin, ChapsMyAss, Chris Cali, Colton Bredlau, Dan Noorman, Derek Sigmund, Dusty Beeman, Ian T. Clark, Jackal, Jason Thompson, Jawar Hello, Jill Grote, Johnny Five, Jordan Sloat, Jose Villalobos, Joseph Jury, Joshua DeProy, Justin Childress, Cody Gibson, Creeper207, Mad Genie Confused Koala, Marshall Thompson, Megan S., Michael Anderson, Nintendo 101, Paul @Drunk on Mako, Philip Aleva Cox, Pratable, Rob McCann, Bobby Mac 265, Roger Reichart, Russell Sayer, Scott Matthews, Sir Phobos, Smithy Poo, Tux DC, Wham Bam Sam the Gaming Man, Zach Marcus, Zachary Pliggy, and Zek 3 Sword Sama. Truly, thank you so much for continuing to listen to and support the All Things Nintendo podcast.